My son got suspended for the best reason ever. I was elbow deep in soap suds when my phone rang at 2:47 p.m. on Tuesday. The caller ID showed Lincoln Elementary, and my heart immediately dropped into my stomach. You never get good news when your kid's school calls in the middle of the day. Ms. Rodriguez? This is Principal Matthews. I need you to come pick up Danny immediately. He's been suspended for 3 days. The plate I was washing slipped from my hands and clattered into the sink. Suspended? Danny? Are you sure you have the right kid? I'm afraid so. He was extremely disrespectful to his teacher, Mrs. Henderson, and refused multiple opportunities to apologize for his inappropriate outburst. My 8-year-old son Danny had never even gotten a yellow card for talking too much, let alone been suspended. The kid who still apologized to furniture when he bumped into it had somehow warranted a 3-day suspension? What exactly did he do? I asked, already grabbing my keys and purse. I think it's better if we discuss this in person. How quickly can you get here? 20 minutes later, I was sitting in Principal Matthew's stuffy office across from my red-eyed son, who looked smaller than usual in the oversized chair. His Pokemon backpack sat at his feet, hastily packed with his belongings. Danny disrupted Mrs. Henderson's math lesson by shouting at her in front of the entire class. Principal Matthews began, consulting a yellow incident report. When she asked him to apologize and return to his seat, he refused and continued arguing. This kind of defiant behavior simply cannot be tolerated. I looked at Danny, whose jaw was set in a way I'd never seen before. He wasn't crying anymore, but his fists were clenched in his lap. Danny, is that what happened? I asked gently. He nodded, then looked up at me with those big brown eyes that were exactly like his father's. But Mom, she was being really mean to Marcus. Again. Marcus. I knew Marcus, sweet kid with autism who lived 3 streets over from us. Danny had mentioned him a few times, always fondly. They'd become friends during lunch period when Danny noticed Marcus sitting alone. Mean how? I pressed, ignoring Principal Matthews' disapproving expression. She always pretends she can't hear Marcus when he raises his hand. And today during math groups, she put everyone else together but made Marcus sit by himself. When he asked why, she said some kids learn better alone and did this fake smile thing. Danny's voice got stronger as he continued. Then when Marcus got confused about the worksheet, she said really loudly that some students just can't keep up with 3rd grade work. My blood started to simmer. And what did you say to Mrs. Henderson? I stood up and said she was picking on Marcus because he's different and that it wasn't fair. I told her she was being a bully. Principal Matthews cleared his throat. While Danny may have thought he was helping, there are appropriate channels for concerns about classroom management. 8-year-olds don't get to question their teachers' methods in front of other students. Did anyone look into whether Danny's concerns were valid? I asked. Mrs. Henderson has been teaching here for 12 years. She's very experienced with special needs inclusion. That wasn't an answer, and we all knew it. Danny reached for my hand. I'm not sorry I said it, Mom. Someone had to. In that moment, looking at my brave little boy who'd risked getting in trouble to defend his friend, I felt my chest swell with fierce pride. This suspension might just be the best thing that ever happened to us. The car ride home was quiet except for the sound of Danny's seatbelt clicking as he fidgeted. I kept glancing at him in the rearview mirror, watching him stare out the window with that same determined expression from Principal Matthews' office. Are you mad at me? He finally asked as we pulled into our driveway. I turned around to face him fully. Danny, I need you to tell me everything about Mrs. Henderson and Marcus. Not just today, but everything you've noticed. His eyes widened slightly. You believe me? Of course I believe you. But if we're going to help Marcus, I need to know exactly what's been happening. Over the next hour, sitting at our kitchen table with chocolate chip cookies and milk, Danny laid out a pattern of behavior that made my stomach turn. Mrs. Henderson consistently forgot to call on Marcus during lessons. She'd speak extra slowly and loudly to him in front of other kids. During group activities, she'd claim there were odd numbers and Marcus would have to work alone. She'd make comments about different learning speeds whenever Marcus needed extra time. She does this thing where she'll ask the class a question, and when Marcus raises his hand, she'll look right at him and then call on someone else, Danny explained, crumbs scattered around his plate. And if Marcus calls out the answer anyway, she says stuff like we need to wait for students who follow directions. I was taking notes, my handwriting getting messy as my anger grew. Has Marcus told his parents? Danny shrugged. He tried, but his mom thinks he's just having trouble adjusting. Mrs. Henderson is really nice when parents are around. Like, super fake nice. That evening, I called Marcus's mother, Elena. We'd chatted briefly at school pickup before, but I didn't know her well. When I explained why I was calling, there was a long pause. Danny said that? About Mrs. Henderson? Elena's voice was careful, controlled. Has Marcus mentioned anything at home? Another pause. He's been having meltdowns after school. More than usual. And he keeps saying he's stupid and can't do 3rd grade work. Her voice cracked slightly. I thought it was just the transition stress. His therapist said it could take months to adjust. Elena, what if it's not adjustment issues? What if someone is making him feel that way? We talked for 45 minutes. Elena shared that Marcus had become reluctant to go to school, something that had never been a problem before. He'd started having accidents again after being potty trained for years. He'd asked if he could be homeschooled like his cousin. I have a parent-teacher conference scheduled for next Friday, Elena said. Would you and Danny come with me? I know it's not standard, but if Danny witnessed these things. Absolutely. But Elena, I think we should document everything first. Get it all down on paper with dates and times. After we hung up, I found Danny in his room, building with Legos but not really focused. Hey buddy, how would you feel about writing down everything you remember about Mrs. Henderson and Marcus? Like a report? He looked up at me seriously. Will it help Marcus? It might. But Danny, this could get complicated. Some adults might not like that you're telling these stories about a teacher. He was quiet for a moment, then started putting his Legos away with unusual precision. Mom, what if other kids see what she does and think it's okay to treat people like Marcus that way? My heart clenched. My 8-year-old had just articulated something that apparently had escaped Principal Matthews entirely. Then we make sure that doesn't happen, I said firmly. But I had no idea what we were really up against. The next morning, I called in sick to work and spent 3 hours creating what I dramatically called the Henderson file. Danny sat beside me at the kitchen table, methodically recounting incidents with a kind of detail that reminded me he definitely got his memory from my side of the family. September 15th, that was the day she made Marcus sit in the hallway during art because she said his humming was distracting, Danny reported, swinging his legs from his chair. But Tommy Martinez makes way more noise and he never has to leave. October 3rd, she told the whole class that some students needed extra processing time when Marcus was still working on his reading worksheet. Everyone looked at him. By noon, we had documented 14 separate incidents spanning 2 months. 14 times my son had watched a teacher systematically chip away at his friend's competence and dignity. I was just closing my laptop when my phone rang. The caller ID made my stomach drop. Lincoln Elementary again. Ms. Rodriguez? This is Mrs. Henderson. My grip tightened on the phone. Mrs. Henderson. I wanted to reach out personally about yesterday's incident. I've been teaching for 12 years, and I've never had a student speak to me that way. Her voice had a syrupy quality that immediately put me on edge. I'm concerned about Daniel's attitude toward authority figures. I'm more concerned about your treatment of Marcus Delgado. The pause stretched long enough that I wondered if she'd hung up. I'm not sure what Daniel has told you, but children sometimes misinterpret classroom management strategies. Marcus requires different approaches, and I've found that. Different approaches like excluding him from group work and speaking to him like he's incompetent? Ms. Rodriguez, I think you're getting some very skewed information. Perhaps we should schedule a meeting to discuss Daniel's academic performance and behavioral concerns. The threat was subtle but clear. Question my methods, and your son's grades might suffer. Actually, Mrs. Henderson, Elena Delgado and I will be attending her parent conference on Friday. I'm sure we can discuss everything then. This time the silence was sharp, brittle. When she spoke again, the fake sweetness was gone. That's highly irregular. Parent conferences are typically limited to the student's immediate family. Then I guess it's good that Principal Matthews already approved my attendance as a witness. I hadn't actually asked Principal Matthews yet, but Mrs. Henderson didn't need to know that. After she hung up, I immediately called the principal's office. His secretary, Mrs. Kim, had always been friendly during school events. Oh honey, you want to sit in on another child's conference? That's definitely not standard protocol, she said, but her tone was thoughtful rather than dismissive. Can I ask why? I took a breath. My son witnessed some concerning interactions between Mrs. Henderson and Marcus Delgado. Elena requested my presence to help document the issues. You know what? Let me talk to Principal Matthews when he gets back from lunch. Between you and me, this isn't the first call I've gotten about Mrs. Henderson this month. My pulse quickened. Other calls? I probably shouldn't say more, but let's just say Friday's meeting might be more important than you realize. After hanging up, I sat staring at my phone, pieces clicking together in my mind. Mrs. Henderson's immediate call to me this morning. Her obvious discomfort about the joint conference. Mrs. Kim's hint about other complaints. Danny wandered into the kitchen, still in his pajamas, one of the perks of suspension, apparently. Mom, can I call Marcus? I want to make sure he's okay. Of course, baby. I handed him the phone and listened as he spoke to his friend with a kind of gentle encouragement that made my heart ache. When he hung up, his expression was troubled. Marcus said Mrs. Henderson was extra mean yesterday after I got sent to the principal. She made him stay in from recess to practice following directions. The retaliation had already started. And we still had 4 days until the conference. That afternoon, my phone started ringing. First, it was Sarah Chen, whose daughter Lucy was in Danny's class. I heard about what happened with Danny yesterday, she said, her voice careful. Lucy came home talking about it. She said Danny was standing up for Marcus? That's right. Why? Because Lucy has been asking me why her teacher doesn't like a special boy. Those were her exact words. I thought maybe she was misunderstanding something, but after hearing about Danny. Sarah's daughter had noticed it too. A 6-year-old had picked up on Mrs. Henderson's treatment of Marcus. Sarah, would Lucy be comfortable talking about what she's seen? With her parents there, of course. I think so. She's been bothered by it for weeks. An hour later, it was Jennifer Walsh, Tommy's mom. Then Miguel Santos, whose son sat near Marcus. By evening, I had a list of 5 parents who wanted to know more about Friday's meeting. Word was spreading. But not all the calls were supportive. Around 7 p.m., my phone lit up with a number I didn't recognize. This is Patricia Morrison. My daughter Chloe is in Mrs. Henderson's class. The woman's voice was clipped, annoyed. I hear you're stirring up trouble over normal classroom management. My jaw tightened. I'm sorry, who is this? I'm the PTA treasurer, and Mrs. Henderson is one of our most dedicated teachers. She volunteers for every event, stays late tutoring students, and frankly, some children need firmer guidance than others. Firmer guidance? Like isolation and public humiliation? Special needs children require specialized approaches. Perhaps Marcus would be better served in a more appropriate classroom setting. The euphemisms made my skin crawl. You mean he should be segregated because his teacher can't be bothered to show him basic respect? I'm calling to suggest you reconsider this crusade of yours. Mrs. Henderson has many supporters in this district, including school board members. It would be unfortunate if Danny faced additional disciplinary issues due to his mother's misguided advocacy. Another threat. This one wasn't even subtle. After she hung up, I sat on my couch feeling the weight of what we were up against. Mrs. Henderson wasn't just a teacher, she was connected, popular with certain parents, protected by years of reputation. But then I looked at the list of names on my coffee table. 5 families who'd reached out today. 5 kids who'd witnessed the same pattern Danny described. My phone buzzed with a text from Elena. * Marcus had a good day at school. First time in weeks he didn't cry at pickup. I asked what was different. He said his friend Danny wasn't there to see Mrs. Henderson be mean to him, so she wasn't mean. I read the message 3 times, each pass making me angrier. Mrs. Henderson had been performing her cruelty, using Marcus's humiliation as entertainment for the class. Without her audience of children, she'd apparently found no joy in tormenting him. Danny appeared in the doorway, clutching his stuffed elephant, something he only did when he was worried. Mom, Tyler's mom called Tyler and told him not to talk to me anymore. She said I'm a troublemaker now. I pulled him onto the couch next to me. Tyler had been Danny's friend since kindergarten. Some adults don't like it when kids point out unfair things, I explained carefully. They think children should always stay quiet, even when they see someone being hurt. But that's dumb. If grown-ups are doing wrong things, someone should tell them. You're absolutely right. But Danny, this might get harder before it gets better. Some people are going to be upset with us. He was quiet for a long moment, absently stroking his elephant's worn ears. Will Marcus be safer if we stop? No, baby. He won't. Then we keep going. Friday couldn't come fast enough. Thursday morning brought a call from Principal Matthews himself, and his tone was significantly colder than our previous conversation. Ms. Rodriguez, I understand you're planning to attend the Delgado conference tomorrow. I have to advise against this course of action. I switched the phone to speaker so I could continue making Danny's breakfast. Why is that? We've had several concerned calls from parents about rumors circulating regarding Mrs. Henderson. This kind of speculation can be very damaging to a teacher's reputation and career. What about the damage to Marcus's education and self-esteem? Mrs. Henderson has agreed to have the autism resource specialist observe her classroom next week. We're taking appropriate steps to address any legitimate concerns. I nearly dropped the orange juice pitcher. Next week? After she's had time to modify her behavior because she knows she's being watched. Ms. Rodriguez, I'm trying to handle this sensitively for everyone involved. But if you continue to organize parents against one of my teachers, I'll have to consider whether Danny's behavioral issues might require alternative educational placement. There it was. The nuclear option. Question the teacher, lose your kid's spot at the school. Are you seriously threatening to kick out an 8-year-old for standing up to a bully? I'm suggesting that a child who can't respect authority might benefit from a more structured environment. There are disciplinary schools that specialize in defiant students. My hands were shaking as I hung up. Danny looked up from his cereal, clearly having heard enough to understand we were in trouble. What's a disciplinary school? He asked quietly. Before I could answer, my phone rang again. This time it was Elena, and she was crying. They're trying to transfer Marcus, she sobbed. I just got a call from the district office. They said his needs aren't being adequately met in a general education classroom and they want to move him to the special education center across town. When? Monday. They're saying it's for his own benefit, that he'll receive more individualized attention. I sank into a chair. They were removing Marcus from the school entirely, eliminating the problem rather than addressing Mrs. Henderson's behavior. Elena, this is retaliation. They're trying to make this go away by getting rid of the witnesses. I don't know what to do. My husband thinks maybe they're right, maybe Marcus would be happier somewhere else. He says I should stop fighting it. After calming Elena down and convincing her to hold off on signing any transfer papers, I spent the rest of the morning making calls. The autism resource specialist Mrs. Henderson mentioned? She was on vacation until the following month. The district's special education coordinator? Conveniently unreachable. But Sarah Chen had news that changed everything. I talked to my neighbor last night, she said when she called around noon. Her daughter had Mrs. Henderson 3 years ago. She said she complained multiple times about similar issues, but nothing was ever done. Similar how? Her daughter Emma has dyslexia. Mrs. Henderson used to make her read aloud in front of the class even when Emma begged not to. When she'd struggle with words, Mrs. Henderson would sigh dramatically and say things like, I guess we'll have to wait for Emma to figure it out. My stomach clenched. Did they file a formal complaint? They tried. But Mrs. Henderson's husband works for the district's legal department. And her sister-in-law is married to school board member Richard Paulson. The connections ran deeper than I'd imagined. Mrs. Henderson wasn't just protected by seniority, she was protected by family. Sarah, would Emma's mom be willing to come to tomorrow's meeting? She already asked if she could. By Thursday evening, our small group had grown to 8 families with stories spanning 5 years. Mrs. Henderson had been systematically targeting vulnerable children, kids with learning differences, shy kids, anyone who couldn't effectively advocate for themselves. But she'd made one crucial mistake. She'd gone after Marcus in front of my son. And Danny, unlike her previous victims, had a mother who was absolutely done being polite. Friday morning arrived gray and drizzly, matching my mood perfectly. I barely slept, running through potential scenarios in my head. Danny had crawled into my bed around 3 a.m. after a nightmare about Marcus crying alone at a new school. Today's the day, isn't it, Mom? He asked over his Lucky Charms, stirring them absently. Today's the day, I confirmed, trying to project more confidence than I felt. The meeting was scheduled for 2:30 p.m. in conference room B. I'd specifically requested the larger room when Mrs. Kim called to confirm yesterday. What I hadn't mentioned was that we'd need space for 8 families, not just Elena and me. At 1:45 p.m., I pulled into Lincoln Elementary's parking lot and immediately noticed Principal Matthews standing by the front entrance, checking his watch with obvious agitation. Through the glass doors, I could see Mrs. Henderson pacing near the main office. Elena was waiting by her car, clutching a manila folder thick with documentation we'd compiled. Her husband Miguel stood beside her, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else on earth. Any word from the others? I asked as we approached the building. Sarah's already inside with Emma's mom, Lisa. Jennifer's coming straight from work, and the Santos family should be here any minute. Principal Matthews intercepted us the moment we stepped through the doors. Ms. Rodriguez, Mrs. Delgado, I need to speak with you privately before we begin. He guided us toward his office, but I could see Mrs. Henderson's face through the conference room's glass wall. She was on her phone, speaking rapidly with sharp, agitated gestures. Ladies, I'm going to be direct, Principal Matthews began, not bothering to sit down. The superintendent has been made aware of this situation. Mrs. Henderson's family connections aside, Lincoln Elementary cannot afford the kind of negative attention this is generating. Good, I said. Maybe some attention will finally get Marcus the fair treatment he deserves. What I'm offering is a compromise. Mrs. Henderson has agreed to attend sensitivity training over winter break. Marcus can be moved to Mrs. Peterson's class, she's excellent with special needs inclusion. And we'll consider Danny's suspension a misunderstanding that can be expunged from his record. Elena shifted beside me. I could tell she was tempted. It would solve Marcus's immediate problem without the confrontation we'd all been dreading. What about the other kids she's targeted over the years? I asked. What about making sure this never happens again? Ms. Rodriguez, Mrs. Henderson is 2 years from retirement. This arrangement ensures everyone's needs are met while avoiding a public spectacle that could harm the school's reputation. Through his office window, I watched Sarachan walk past with a woman I didn't recognize, Lisa, presumably, followed by Miguel Santos and his wife Carmen. Our small parent conference was turning into something much larger. Principal Matthews noticed too. His jaw tightened as he counted heads through the glass. How many people did you invite to this meeting? He asked sharply. Just families who have legitimate concerns about Mrs. Henderson's classroom management, I replied innocently. At exactly 2:30 p.m., Jennifer Walsh rushed through the front doors, still wearing her hospital scrubs from her nursing shift. She gave me a quick thumbs up as she headed toward conference room B. Principal Matthews rubbed his temples. This is highly irregular. Parent conferences are designed for individual family concerns, not group accusations. Then maybe individual families shouldn't have identical problems with the same teacher, Elena said quietly. It was the first time I'd heard steel in her voice, and I was proud of her. Mrs. Delgado, you have 5 minutes to decide. Take the classroom transfer, or we proceed with this circus. But I want you to know that if we go forward, the district will vigorously defend Mrs. Henderson, and the process could take months. The threat was clear: take the easy way out, or prepare for war. Elena looked at me, then toward the conference room where our makeshift coalition was gathering. Principal Matthews, she said, straightening her shoulders, my son deserves better than a teacher who needs sensitivity training to treat him with basic human decency. He sighed heavily. Very well. But don't say I didn't warn you. Conference room B felt smaller than I'd expected, despite being the largest meeting space at Lincoln Elementary. 8 families had somehow squeezed around the oval table meant for 4, with kids perched on folding chairs their parents had grabbed from the hallway. The air was thick with nervous energy and the competing scents of coffee and someone's vanilla perfume. Mrs. Henderson sat at the far end of the table, flanked by Principal Matthews and a woman I didn't recognize, mid-50s, sharp suit, briefcase that screamed legal department. Mrs. Henderson's usual warm classroom smile was nowhere to be seen. Instead, her face was pale and pinched, and she kept glancing at the door like she was planning an escape route. Before we begin, Principal Matthews announced, I'd like to introduce District Legal Coordinator Janet Morrison. My blood chilled. Morrison. As in Patricia Morrison, the PTA treasurer who'd called to threaten me earlier this week. This woman had to be related. I'm here to ensure this meeting stays within appropriate bounds, Janet Morrison said crisply, pulling out a legal pad. False accusations against district employees can have serious legal ramifications. Sarah Chen leaned forward. Are you related to Patricia Morrison? Janet's pen paused mid-note. Patricia is my daughter-in-law. But that has no bearing on my professional responsibilities here. Professional responsibilities like protecting Mrs. Henderson regardless of what we have to say? I asked. My responsibility is protecting the district from potentially libelous statements. Elena cleared her throat and opened her manila folder with shaking hands. I prepared a timeline of incidents involving my son Marcus. Mrs. Delgado, Mrs. Henderson interrupted, her voice strained but still carrying that condescending teacher tone. I understand you have concerns, but you weren't present during any of these alleged incidents. You're relying on the word of children who may have misinterpreted normal classroom management. I was present, Danny said clearly from his spot next to me. Mrs. Henderson's eyes darted to him, then away. Daniel, you've been out of school since Tuesday. I think your memory might be. October 15th, Danny continued, pulling out the notebook where we documented everything. You made Marcus stand at the front of the class and count to 100 because he stymied during silent reading. You said the whole class had to wait until he learned to control himself. The room went dead quiet. Mrs. Henderson's face flushed red. That's not, Daniel, you're misremembering. I was there too, said Lucy Chen, Sarah's daughter. Her voice was barely a whisper, but everyone heard her. Marcus was crying, but he kept counting because you said he couldn't sit down until he finished. Lucy, sweetheart, sometimes when we don't understand, Mrs. Henderson started. I understand mean, Lucy said, louder now. My mom taught me the difference between firm and mean. That was mean. Jennifer Walsh's son Tommy nodded vigorously. And remember when you made Marcus clean everyone's art supplies by himself because you said he made the mess? But we all made messes. You just picked him. Principal Matthews held up his hand. Children, we appreciate your input, but adults are better equipped too. November 2nd, interrupted Carmen Santos, reading from her own notes. My son Diego came home asking why some kids were too dumb for regular math. When I asked what he meant, he said Mrs. Henderson announced that Marcus needed baby math while the rest of the class did big kid work. Mrs. Henderson shot to her feet. These children are taking things completely out of context. Yes, Marcus requires modifications, but I've always. Always what? Lisa Martinez's voice cut through the room like a blade. Always humiliated kids who learn differently? Because my daughter Emma graduated 3 years ago, and she still has nightmares about your class. Janet Morrison's pen was moving furiously now. Mrs. Martinez, I need to caution you that making statements about emotional damage. Document this, Lisa snapped, turning to face Janet directly. October 2019, November 2019, January 2020, March 2020. For separate emails I sent requesting that Mrs. Henderson stop making my dyslexic daughter read aloud when Emma specifically asked not to. For times I was told Emma needed to build confidence and overcome her learning differences. She pulled out her phone and started scrolling. I have the emails. I have Emma's pediatrician's notes documenting anxiety. I have the therapy bills. Mrs. Henderson sank back into her chair, her face now ashen. Lisa, Emma was a lovely student. I was trying to help her. By making her cry in front of her classmates? By sighing loudly every time she stumbled over words? By telling the class that some students needed extra patience while staring directly at my daughter? The dominoes were falling faster than anyone could stop them. Miguel Santos cleared his throat. Mrs. Henderson, do you remember Diego's birthday last month? You told the class they could each share one thing that made them special. When Marcus said he was good at remembering dinosaur names, you said the class didn't have time for random facts and moved on to the next student. That's not. I was managing time constraints. Funny how you found time for everyone else's sharing, Miguel continued quietly. Diego counted. Marcus was the only one you cut off. Principal Matthews was frantically taking notes now, probably realizing that this wasn't going away with a simple classroom transfer and sensitivity training. Janet Morrison closed her legal pad with a sharp snap. I think we've heard enough testimony for today. The district will review these allegations and... Actually, Elena said, her voice stronger than I'd heard all week, I don't think we're finished. She reached into her folder and pulled out a single sheet of paper that made Mrs. Henderson's face go completely white. Because yesterday, Marcus told me something else. Elena held up the paper with steady hands, though I could see her fingers trembling slightly at the edges. The room had gone so quiet I could hear the wall clock ticking above Principal Matthews' head. Marcus told me that Mrs. Henderson has a special folder, Elena continued, her voice gaining strength with each word. A folder she keeps in her bottom desk drawer with pictures of students she calls problem children. Mrs. Henderson's chair creaked as she shifted uncomfortably. Elena, children often misunderstand. He described it perfectly. A manila folder with a red label. Inside are printed photos from the school picture day, with handwritten notes. Elena's eyes never left Mrs. Henderson's face. Marcus saw his own photo in there when you left your desk open during lunch duty last Friday. The note said, needs constant redirection, disruptive to learning environment. Principal Matthews set down his pen. Mrs. Henderson, is this true? I keep documentation on students who require additional support strategies, Mrs. Henderson said carefully. It's standard practice for... Emma's photo was in there too, Lisa Martinez said suddenly, her face pale with realization. 3 years ago, Emma came home asking what attention-seeking behavior meant. I thought maybe she'd overheard teachers talking in general, but she said she saw it written under her picture in Mrs. Henderson's special folder. The color drained completely from Mrs. Henderson's face. Danny tugged on my sleeve. Mom, should I tell them about the other thing Marcus said? Every adult in the room turned to look at my 8-year-old son, who suddenly seemed much older than his years. What other thing, buddy? I asked gently. Marcus said Mrs. Henderson told him the folder was full of kids who make teachers' jobs harder. She said if he didn't want to be in trouble all the time, he needed to learn to be more like the good students. Janet Morrison reopened her legal pad, scribbling rapidly. This had moved far beyond classroom management issues into potential discrimination and emotional abuse territory. Furthermore, Elena continued, pulling out another document, I requested Marcus's educational records yesterday under the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act. According to district policy, any behavioral documentation should be filed in his official student record. She slid the paper across to Principal Matthews. There are no behavior reports, no incident documentation, no special accommodation requests. Nothing. Which means either Mrs. Henderson has been failing to properly document issues that supposedly require a folder full of photographs, or the problems exist only in her personal opinion, I finished, understanding flooding through me. Mrs. Henderson stood up abruptly, her chair rolling backward and hitting the wall. I've been teaching for 12 years. I have the highest test scores in the 3rd grade. Parents specifically request their children be placed in my classroom. Certain parents request you, Sarah Chen said pointedly, glancing at Janet Morrison. The parents who want their kids in classes without problem children. The accusation hung in the air like smoke. Principal Matthews loosened his tie, clearly realizing this meeting had spiraled far beyond his control. Mrs. Henderson, he said carefully, I'm going to need to see this folder you mentioned. Today. There's no folder, Mrs. Henderson said quickly. Too quickly. Marcus misunderstood what he saw. Children often. Then you won't mind if we take a look at your desk, Janet Morrison said, and I realized with shock that even the district's legal coordinator was now treating Mrs. Henderson as a liability rather than an asset. The 12-year veteran teacher, with her perfect test scores and parent recommendations, had just lost the support of her own administration. And we were just getting started. The walk to Mrs. Henderson's classroom felt like a funeral march. Our entire group moved through Lincoln Elementary's hallways in tense silence, footsteps echoing off the polished linoleum. Mrs. Henderson led the way, her shoulders rigid and her keys jangling with each shaky step. This is highly irregular, Principal Matthews muttered for the 3rd time, but he didn't stop us. Janet Morrison walked beside him, her heels clicking authoritatively as she spoke in low tones into her phone. Danny's small hand found mine as we approached room 14B. Through the doorway, I could see the cheerful bulletin boards and alphabet charts that had once seemed so welcoming during back-to-school night. Now they felt like stage dressing for something much darker. Mrs. Henderson's desk sat in the far corner, a heavy wooden fortress surrounded by neat stacks of graded papers and a collection of apple-shaped paperweights, gifts from grateful parents over the years. She hesitated at her desk chair, her hand hovering over the bottom drawer handle. This is a violation of my privacy, she said, but her voice lacked conviction. Personnel have rights. You're not under investigation as personnel, Janet Morrison cut her off smoothly. This is a student welfare inquiry. Completely different jurisdiction. Elena stepped forward, still clutching Marcus's school photo that she'd brought from home. Just open the drawer, please. Mrs. Henderson's hand trembled as she pulled the metal handle. The drawer slid open with a soft scraping sound that seemed unnaturally loud in the quiet classroom. At first glance, it looked like typical teacher supplies, extra pens, a stapler, some personal items. But nestled beneath a box of paper clips was exactly what Marcus had described, a manila folder with a red label that read Behavioral Concerns, Confidential. Principal Matthews reached for it before Mrs. Henderson could react. The folder was thicker than I'd expected, easily containing 20 or 30 pages. He opened it carefully, and I saw his face change as he examined the contents. Jesus Christ, he whispered, then immediately glanced at the children. I mean, this is concerning. He held up the first item, a school picture of Marcus, clipped to a sheet of handwritten notes. From where I stood, I could make out phrases like excessive stimming, disrupts instruction, and parent in denial about capabilities. But Marcus wasn't alone. The second photo showed Emma Martinez. The third was a boy I didn't recognize, probably a student from previous years. The fourth was a girl with Down syndrome who I remembered seeing at school events. 12 students, Principal Matthews said, his voice hollow as he flipped through the pages. Going back 4 years. Mrs. Henderson sank into her chair, all pretense finally abandoned. They were teaching tools, she said weakly. To help me remember individual accommodation strategies. Jennifer Walsh leaned over Principal Matthews' shoulder and gasped. That's Kevin Morrison. Patricia Morrison's grandson. He was in your class 2 years ago. Janet Morrison's pen stopped moving. Kevin doesn't have any learning differences or behavioral issues. But he's adopted, Jennifer continued. His birth mother had addiction issues. Patricia used to complain at PTA meetings about how genetics would eventually show themselves. I watched Janet Morrison's face as the implications hit her. Her own family had been feeding Mrs. Henderson information about students' backgrounds, helping her target vulnerable children. Elena's voice was barely controlled when she spoke. What does Marcus's file say? Read it out loud. Principal Matthews cleared his throat uncomfortably. Student displays frequent self-soothing behaviors that distract other learners. Requires constant redirection and modified expectations. Parents resistant to alternative placement discussions. Note, father more reasonable than mother regarding realistic academic goals. The last sentence hit Elena like a physical blow. I watched her face crumple as she realized Mrs. Henderson had been manipulating her family dynamics, playing her and Miguel against each other. You made me doubt myself, Elena whispered. You made me think I was pushing Marcus too hard, expecting too much. You made Miguel think I was in denial. Mrs. Henderson looked up with desperate eyes. Elena, I was trying to help Marcus succeed by setting appropriate expectations. By documenting his private struggles like a criminal record? Sarah Chin interrupted. By photographing him like evidence? Danny tugged on my shirt again. When I looked down, his face was pale but determined. Mom, I think there's more. What do you mean, buddy? I asked, crouching down to Danny's eye level. Marcus told me Mrs. Henderson takes pictures sometimes. With her phone. When kids are crying or having bad days. His voice dropped to a whisper. He said she showed the other teachers once. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Janet Morrison's phone slipped from her hand and clattered to the floor. Daniel, that's a very serious accusation, Principal Matthews said carefully. Are you certain about this? Marcus said it happened when Tommy had his meltdown in October. And when Sophia wet herself during the lockdown drill. Mrs. Henderson took pictures and said it was for documentation purposes. Mrs. Henderson shot to her feet so fast her chair toppled backward. That's absolutely false. I would never. Children make up stories when they're upset. Then you won't mind showing us your phone, Janet Morrison said, her professional mask finally cracking. As the district's legal coordinator, she clearly understood the catastrophic liability implications of a teacher photographing students in distress. This is harassment, Mrs. Henderson snapped, but her hand instinctively moved to protect the purse hanging from her chair. You can't just demand to search my personal property. Actually, we can, Principal Matthews said grimly, pulling out his own phone. District Policy 4.7b, electronic devices used on school grounds for any purpose related to student interaction are subject to administrative review. Janet, I'm calling Superintendent Williams. Now. The next 10 minutes passed in a blur of tense phone calls and whispered conferences. Elena held Marcus's photo against her chest like she was protecting him retroactively. Miguel Santos paced near the windows, occasionally muttering in Spanish. Sarah Chen kept checking her watch. Lucy's Little League game started at 6 p.m., and this nightmare kept expanding. When Superintendent Williams arrived, he looked like a man who'd already calculated the cost of lawsuits in his head. Tall, gray-haired, wearing an expression of barely controlled panic that didn't bode well for Mrs. Henderson's employment prospects. Folks, I'm going to ask the families to step outside while we handle the technical aspects of this investigation, he announced, not bothering with introductions or pleasantries. No, Elena said firmly. We're not leaving. Marcus trusted my son enough to tell him what was happening. I'm not walking away now. Williams looked like he wanted to argue, but Janet Morrison whispered something in his ear that made his face go pale. Mrs. Henderson, he said, turning to face her directly. I need your phone. Voluntarily. Right now. Her hands were shaking as she unlocked the device and handed it over. Williams immediately passed it to Janet Morrison, who began scrolling through with the efficiency of someone who'd done digital investigations before. The silence stretched for nearly 5 minutes. Then Janet Morrison's face went completely white. Rick, she said quietly to the superintendent. We need to discuss this privately. How many photos? Williams asked, his voice barely audible. 17. Going back 8 months. Mrs. Henderson collapsed into her chair like a deflated balloon. They were for educational purposes, she whispered. To show other teachers the behaviors I was dealing with. To document patterns. You photographed children crying, Elena said, her voice carrying a fury I'd never heard before. You photographed my son having meltdowns and shared them with other people? It wasn't like that. What was it like, exactly? Jennifer Walsh demanded. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you've been collecting humiliating images of vulnerable children like trophies. Superintendent Williams held up his hand for silence. Mrs. Henderson, you're suspended immediately pending a full investigation. Security will escort you from the building. You are not to contact students, families, or staff during this process. Rick, please, I can explain. The explanation is for the lawyers now, Margaret. And possibly the police. The word police sent a chill through the room. This had escalated far beyond a bad teacher situation into potential criminal territory. Danny looked up at me with those serious brown eyes. Mom, does this mean Marcus will be safe now? Before I could answer, my phone buzzed with a text message. The number was blocked, but the message was crystal clear. Asterisk, this isn't over. Your son just made a very powerful enemy. Some battles aren't worth winning. Asterisk. I looked around the room at Mrs. Henderson being led out by security, at the superintendent frantically making damage control calls, at Janet Morrison cataloging evidence on her legal pad. We'd won this battle. But someone out there thought the war was just beginning. The victory celebration lasted exactly 12 hours. Saturday morning at 7:23 a.m., my phone rang with Elena's number, but when I answered, it was Miguel's voice, tied with panic. "They're trying to expel Marcus," he said without preamble. "Emergency disciplinary hearing Monday at 9 a.m. They're saying he violated the student code of conduct." I sat up so fast I nearly dropped the phone. What? How is that even possible? Apparently Marcus made false accusations against a teacher and participated in organized harassment designed to damage district personnel. Miguel's voice cracked. "They're also claiming he violated privacy policies by reporting confidential classroom management strategies." Danny wandered into my room, drawn by my raised voice. When he saw my expression, his face immediately went pale. "Miguel, that's insane. Marcus is 8 years old. He can't be held responsible for adult decisions to investigate misconduct. The letter says he willfully participated in a coordinated attack and that his unreliable testimony wasted district resources." Elena's been crying since 6 a.m. I was already pulling on clothes, my mind racing through the legal implications. Who signed the expulsion notice? Assistant Superintendent Patricia Carlisle. And get this, the hearing officer is going to be Dr. James Morrison. The name hit me like ice water. Morrison. As in Janet Morrison's family? Has to be. Elena looked it up. He's the district's head of student disciplinary review. 23 years in the position. They were circling the wagons, using their own family network to eliminate the problem. A kangaroo court designed to silence Marcus permanently while giving Mrs. Henderson's allies plausible cover. "Miguel, don't sign anything. Don't agree to anything. I'm calling my lawyer." "We can't afford a lawyer, Sophia. Elena's already missed 3 days of work for this mess." After hanging up, I stood in my bedroom feeling the weight of how quickly our victory had turned into something much more dangerous. Danny climbed onto my bed, clutching his stuffed elephant. "Are they going to kick Marcus out of school forever?" he asked quietly. "Not if I can help it, baby." But privately, I was terrified. The district had resources we couldn't match: lawyers, administrative procedures, political connections spanning decades. What did we have? A handful of parents and children telling the truth against an institution designed to protect itself. My phone buzzed with another blocked text. Asterisk told you this wasn't over. Drop the lawyer idea. Some doors shouldn't be opened. Asterisk. Someone was monitoring our calls. By noon, I'd contacted 3 attorneys specializing in educational law. 2 said they were unavailable for new clients at this time. The third, David Chen, Sarah's brother-in-law, agreed to meet Sunday evening, but his voice carried a warning. "Sophia, I need you to understand what you're up against. The Morrison family has connections throughout the county legal system. Dr. James Morrison has never, and I mean never, ruled against a district recommendation in disciplinary hearings. So Marcus is screwed because he told the truth? Marcus is screwed because he threatened the wrong people's reputations. But there might be another angle we can work." Sunday afternoon brought an unexpected visitor. I was helping Danny with a Lego project when the doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I saw a woman in her 50s I didn't recognize, professional clothing, nervous expression, manila envelope clutched in her hands. "Ms. Rodriguez?" "I'm Catherine Walsh. I taught 3rd grade at Lincoln Elementary for 15 years before I retired last June." I opened the door cautiously. "How can I help you?" "I heard about Marcus Delgado's expulsion hearing. I have information the district doesn't want public." She held up the envelope. "Information about Margaret Henderson that goes back much further than anyone realizes." Catherine Walsh's hands shook as she opened the envelope at my kitchen table. Danny had reluctantly gone to his room after I promised he could hear the appropriate parts later. "I should have spoken up years ago," Catherine said, pulling out a stack of photocopied documents. "But I was 2 years from retirement, and Margaret's connections made people afraid to challenge her." The first document was a formal complaint filed in 2018 by a teacher named Robert Torres. According to his statement, Mrs. Henderson had been maintaining unauthorized student profiles that included personal family information gathered from school gossip. Rob transferred to another district after this complaint disappeared from his personnel file, Catherine explained. Suddenly there were budget cuts, and his position was eliminated. The second document made my blood freeze, a pediatric psychologist's report from 2019 recommending therapy for severe school-related anxiety in a 7-year-old student. The child had developed selective mutism after being in Mrs. Henderson's class. The parents were told their daughter was too sensitive for public education, Catherine continued. They ended up homeschooling because no one would address the real problem. But the third document was the smoking gun, an email thread between Mrs. Henderson and former Principal Davidson discussing problematic family situations among students. The emails included speculation about parents' mental health, financial status, and personal relationships, information that could only have come from deliberate investigation. Margaret wasn't just targeting kids randomly, Catherine said. She was specifically going after families she considered inferior. Single mothers, adopted parents, families with special needs children, immigrants, anyone who didn't fit her ideal student demographic. I stared at the emails, recognizing a pattern that made horrible sense. Marcus, autism and immigrant parents. Emma, learning disability and parents who questioned authority. Danny, single mother who worked 2 jobs to afford the district's better schools. Why didn't anyone stop her? Catherine's laugh was bitter. Her test scores were perfect because she drove away any student who might lower them. Her parent satisfaction ratings were high because she only accommodated families with political connections. The district loved her because she made them look successful. And the Morrisons? Margaret's pipeline to information. Janet Morrison's daughter Patricia was always feeding her details about family situations, adoption backgrounds, financial struggles, anything Margaret could use to justify excluding children from opportunities. My phone rang. Sarah Chen's number. Sophia, we have a problem. Lucy's teacher just called. She's being transferred to a different class tomorrow. No explanation. Jennifer Walsh got the same call about Tommy. They were scattering the witnesses, moving our children away from each other before Monday's hearing. Sarah, can you get to my house? Catherine Walsh is here with information about Mrs. Henderson that changes everything. After Sarah arrived and Catherine had repeated her revelations, we sat in stunned silence. The scope of the conspiracy was bigger than any of us had imagined. So what do we do? Sarah asked. Marcus's hearing is tomorrow morning, and they've got the whole system rigged against him. Catherine Walsh closed her envelope and looked at both of us with the determination of someone who'd finally found her courage. We burn it all down, she said simply. I kept copies of everything for 5 years, waiting for the right moment. Margaret Henderson destroyed too many children's lives while I stayed quiet. She pulled out her phone and showed us a contact list. 14 families over the past decade. Kids who left the district, parents who gave up fighting, teachers who transferred rather than make waves. I tracked down 12 of them last night. And? They're ready to testify. All of them. For the first time since Friday, I felt something like hope stirring in my chest. But Catherine wasn't finished. There's more. Margaret's been documenting these children for a reason. She's been building a case to establish a separate track for academically challenging students, essentially creating a segregated program within the school. She handed me a final document, a proposal draft titled Alternative Learning Environment for High-Needs Students, with Mrs. Henderson listed as the lead developer. She wasn't just targeting individual kids, Catherine explained. She was systematically identifying students who could be funneled into a substandard educational track, freeing up resources for families the district wanted to keep happy. The hearing tomorrow wasn't just about Marcus's expulsion. It was about whether Lincoln Elementary would be allowed to institutionalize discrimination against vulnerable children. My phone buzzed with another blocked text, asterisk last warning. Your son's permanent record can be damaged in ways you'll never undo. Walk away. Asterisk. I showed the message to Sarah and Catherine. Sarah's face went white, but Catherine smiled grimly. They're scared, she said. Good. They should be. Danny appeared in the doorway, still clutching his elephant. Mom, I heard you talking about tomorrow. Can I say something? I pulled him onto my lap. What is it, buddy? I want to go to Marcus's hearing tomorrow, Danny said, his voice small but determined. If they're saying he lied, then they're saying I lied too. Before I could respond, my phone rang again. This time it was Elena, and she was sobbing so hard I could barely understand her. Sophia, they came to our house. 2 men in suits said they were from Child Protective Services. They're investigating us for educational neglect because we allegedly forced Marcus to make false statements against his teacher. My blood turned to ice. When? An hour ago. They interviewed Marcus for 45 minutes without letting me stay in the room. They kept asking if we told him what to say, if we promised him rewards for lying about Mrs. Henderson. Elena's voice broke completely. He was so confused, Sophia. He kept asking why everyone thought he was lying when he was just telling the truth. Catherine Walsh grabbed my arm, her face pale. They're using CPS as a weapon. I've seen this before, threatened to take the children away if parents don't back down. Sarah was already on her phone, frantically typing. I'm texting the other families. If they hit Elena today, they'll probably visit the rest of us tonight or tomorrow morning. As if summoned by her words, my doorbell rang. Through the window, I could see an unmarked sedan in my driveway and 2 people in business attire walking up my front steps. Danny, go to your room right now and stay there no matter what you hear, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Catherine, Sarah, you're witnesses to whatever happens next. The woman at my door was mid-40s with kind eyes that didn't match the authority in her voice. Ms. Rodriguez? I'm caseworker Linda Patterson from County Child Protective Services. We need to discuss some concerns about your son Daniel's welfare and educational environment. What concerns? I asked, not inviting them inside. Her male partner, younger and clearly uncomfortable, consulted his tablet. We've received reports that Daniel may have been coached to make false statements against school personnel, and that his recent behavioral issues suggest an unstable home environment. Behavioral issues? You mean standing up for his friend? We understand Daniel was suspended for defiant behavior and disrespectful language toward authority figures, Patterson continued. Combined with allegations that you've been organizing harassment campaigns against district employees, we need to ensure Daniel's emotional well-being isn't being compromised. Behind me, I heard Catherine Walsh moving around my kitchen, and I realized she was probably recording this conversation on her phone. I'd like to see the specific complaints filed against me, I said carefully. Patterson's partner handed me a single sheet of paper. The complainant's name was redacted, but the accusations were specific and damning. Subject has demonstrated unstable behavior including conspiracy theories about educational staff, organizing group harassment of school employees, and coaching minor children to fabricate abuse allegations. This is retaliation, I said, handing the paper back. You're here because we exposed teacher misconduct, not because there are legitimate concerns about my son. Ms. Rodriguez, we just need to interview Daniel briefly to ensure. No. My voice came out sharper than I intended. You can schedule a formal interview with my attorney present, but you're not speaking to my 8-year-old without legal representation. Patterson's expression hardened slightly. Refusing to cooperate with child welfare investigations can be viewed as an indicator of concerning home dynamics. Sarah Chan appeared beside me, her phone held up obviously recording. Hi, I'm Sarah Chan, family friend and witness. Could you repeat that threat for the camera? The male caseworker shifted nervously. Ma'am, this isn't a threat, it's standard procedure. Standard procedure to investigate families who file complaints against school districts? Catherine Walsh's voice carried 20 years of teacher authority as she joined us at the door. I'm Catherine Walsh, retired educator. I'll be documenting this interaction for the superintendent and school board. Patterson looked between the 3 of us, clearly realizing this wasn't going as planned. We'll be in touch about scheduling a formal interview. Ms. Rodriguez, I strongly encourage you to consider what's truly in Daniel's best interests. After they left, the 3 of us sat in my living room feeling like we'd just survived an ambush. My hands were shaking as I checked the locks on my doors. They're not just trying to silence Marcus, Catherine said quietly. They're systematically targeting every family involved. CPS visits, student transfers, disciplinary threats, it's coordinated intimidation. My phone buzzed with a text from Jennifer Walsh, asterisk CPS just laughed. They're hitting everyone tonight. Asterisk. Then Miguel Santos, asterisk child services at our door. Said Carmen and I are under investigation for educational interference. Asterisk. By 8 p.m., 6 families had received CPS visits. The message was clear: withdraw your support for Marcus, or lose your own children. But at 8:47 p.m., my phone rang with a call that changed everything. Ms. Rodriguez? This is Channel 7 News investigative reporter Amanda Foster. I understand there's a story developing about systematic discrimination at Lincoln Elementary. Would you be willing to go on record? Amanda Foster's voice was crisp and professional, but I could hear the excitement underneath. Ms. Rodriguez, I received an anonymous tip about your situation. Someone sent me copies of documents that suggest a pattern of discrimination spanning multiple years. My heart pounded as I motioned for Catherine and Sarah to stay quiet. What kind of documents? Internal district emails discussing problem families, unauthorized student files, and what appears to be a systematic effort to remove special needs children from general education classrooms. The tipster also mentioned coordinated CPS visits targeting families who filed complaints. Catherine Walsh grabbed my arm, her eyes wide. She mouthed say yes urgently. Yes, I'll talk to you. But not just me. There are other families involved, and children who witnessed what happened. Perfect. Can we meet tonight? I know it's last minute, but your son's hearing is tomorrow morning, and once that process starts, the district will claim everything is sub judice, under legal review, and refuse to comment. We arranged to meet at Catherine's house at 10 p.m. She lived outside the school district boundaries, and something about her calm, teacher-decorated living room felt safer than anywhere connected to Lincoln Elementary. Amanda Foster arrived with a cameraman and enough documentation to fill my kitchen table twice over. She was younger than I'd expected, maybe early 30s, with the kind of sharp intelligence that probably made school administrators very nervous. Before we start filming, she said, spreading out papers, I need you to understand what you're walking into. My source provided evidence of a discrimination network involving multiple schools in the district. Mrs. Henderson isn't an isolated problem, she's part of a systematic effort to push out students who might lower test scores or require additional resources. She showed us an organizational chart that made my stomach drop. At the center was Dr. James Morrison, the same man scheduled to oversee Marcus's hearing tomorrow. Connected to him were Mrs. Henderson, Janet Morrison, Principal Matthews, and 6 other school administrators across the district. It's a family enterprise, Amanda explained. The Morrisons have been placing their relatives and allies in key positions for over a decade. They identify undesirable students early, document them heavily, and gradually push them toward alternative schools or out of the district entirely. Sarah Chen leaned forward, studying the chart. That's why Lucy and Tommy were transferred so quickly. They're moving all the witnesses out before tomorrow's hearing. Exactly. But here's what they didn't expect. Amanda pulled out another stack of papers. My source also provided financial records. The district receives bonus funding for maintaining high standardized test scores. In the past 5 years, schools with Morrison family administrators have received an additional $847,000 in performance incentives. Catherine Walsh's face went pale. They're literally profiting from excluding vulnerable children. And there's more. The Alternative Learning Environment program Mrs. Henderson proposed? It's already been approved for 3 other schools. 73 students have been transferred into substandard programs based on criteria that suspiciously match Mrs. Henderson's problem child documentation. Amanda's cameraman had been quietly setting up equipment while she talked. Now he nodded that everything was ready. Ms. Rodriguez, are you prepared to go on camera with these allegations? Once this airs, there's no going back. I thought about Marcus, probably lying awake right now terrified about tomorrow's hearing. I thought about Elena crying over CPS accusations, and Danny asking if his friend would be safe. Yes, I said firmly. But I want to say something specific. Amanda adjusted her microphone as the camera light turned red. Ms. Rodriguez, tell me why your 8-year-old son stood up to his teacher. I looked directly into the camera, thinking about every parent watching who might recognize their own child's struggles in this story. Because sometimes children have better moral clarity than the adults who are supposed to protect them. And because my son understood something the school district seems to have forgotten, that treating any child with cruelty isn't just wrong, it's a betrayal of everything education is supposed to represent. My phone, sitting silent on Catherine's coffee table, suddenly lit up with 17 missed calls. The story was about to explode. The Channel 7 news van was still parked outside Catherine's house when my phone started ringing at 5:47 a.m. Monday morning. I barely slept, running on adrenaline and coffee, but Elena's panicked voice cut through my exhaustion like a knife. Sophia, they moved Marcus's hearing up to 7:30 a.m. We just got the call 20 minutes ago. They're saying it's due to scheduling conflicts, but the hearing officer is different now. My stomach dropped. Different how? Not Dr. James Morrison anymore. Someone named Dr. Patricia Hendricks from the State Education Department. Miguel thinks it's because of your news interview, but I don't know if that's good or bad. I was already pulling on yesterday's clothes, my mind racing. Amanda Foster's story had aired on the 11 p.m. news and again at 6 a.m. By midnight, my phone had been flooded with calls from parents, reporters, and 3 different lawyers offering to represent Marcus pro bono. But the district was adapting faster than we'd anticipated. Elena, the timing change is deliberate. They're trying to hold the hearing before our new legal representation can get there. David Chin isn't available until 9 a.m. What do we do? If I don't show up, they'll rule against Marcus automatically. Catherine Walsh appeared in her kitchen doorway, still in her robe but holding a cup of coffee like a weapon. Tell Elena I'm driving her to that hearing. And tell her we're not going alone. 27 minutes later, we were part of a convoy heading toward Lincoln Elementary. Amanda Foster's news crew led the way, followed by Catherine's car with Elena and Miguel, then my Honda with Danny in the backseat insisting he needed to be there for Marcus. This is scary, Mom, Danny admitted as we pulled into the school parking lot. But Marcus was scared every day, and nobody helped him until I said something. The scene outside Lincoln Elementary looked like a small-scale protest. At least 40 parents had gathered, many holding signs reading "Protect all students" and "Accountability now." I recognized Sarah Chen near the front entrance with Lucy and Tommy, both kids holding handmade posters with Marcus's name. But the opposition had mobilized too. A cluster of well-dressed parents stood near the flagpole, and I caught sight of Patricia Morrison among them, speaking rapidly into her phone while glaring in our direction. Amanda Foster met us at the car. Sophia, this is bigger than we expected. I've gotten calls from parents at 4 other schools in the district reporting similar patterns. The state education department is sending investigators today. What about Marcus's hearing? Dr. Hendricks is legitimate, 20 years investigating discrimination cases. The district probably requested the change hoping she'd be more sympathetic to administrative concerns, but they may have miscalculated. Inside the building, the atmosphere was electric with tension. The conference room had been moved to the library to accommodate observers, but even the larger space felt cramped with nearly 60 people trying to fit inside. Dr. Hendricks was a small woman in her 50s with steel gray hair and the kind of no-nonsense expression that suggested she'd seen every administrative trick in the book. She surveyed the packed room with raised eyebrows. "This is highly unusual," she announced, her voice carrying easily across the crowd. "I was told this was a routine disciplinary hearing for one student." Principal Matthews, looking harried and pale, approached her table. "Dr. Hendricks, the situation has become complicated due to media attention and outside interference." "Outside interference?" Elena stood up from her seat in the front row, Marcus beside her looking small but determined. "These are families whose children have been systematically mistreated. This isn't interference, it's accountability." Dr. Hendricks held up her hand for silence. "Mrs. Delgado, I presume? And this is Marcus?" Marcus nodded solemnly, then surprised everyone by speaking clearly, "Yes, ma'am. I didn't lie about Mrs. Henderson. I just told my friend Danny what happened, and Danny told his mom because he was worried about me." The simplicity of his statement cut through all the administrative complexity like a sword. Dr. Hendricks smiled slightly, the first warm expression I'd seen from any school official in days. "Well then, Marcus, why don't you and I have a conversation about what's been happening in your classroom? And everyone else can listen quietly while we figure out the truth. What happened next will stay with me forever." Dr. Hendricks spent 43 minutes talking directly with Marcus, treating him like the intelligent, articulate child he was instead of a problem to be managed. She asked about specific incidents, dates, how each situation made him feel. Marcus answered every question with heartbreaking honesty, his voice growing stronger as he realized this adult was actually listening. "Mrs. Henderson made me feel like I was broken," he said simply. "Like my brain didn't work right and I made everyone's day harder just by being there." When Dr. Hendricks turned to the evidence, Mrs. Henderson's photo collection, the unauthorized documentation, the systematic exclusion patterns, Principal Matthews' face went ashen. The proof was overwhelming, undeniable. "Dr. Matthews," Dr. Hendricks said, her voice carrying the weight of 20 years' experience investigating these cases, "I'm not just dismissing this expulsion recommendation. I'm ordering an immediate investigation into discriminatory practices at Lincoln Elementary under Section 504 and the Americans with Disabilities Act." She stood up, addressing the packed library directly. "Furthermore, any student who has been transferred, removed, or discouraged from enrollment due to Mrs. Henderson's documented bias will have their placement reviewed and corrected." The room erupted in applause, but Dr. Hendricks wasn't finished. "Mrs. Henderson's teaching certificate is suspended pending criminal investigation for violation of student privacy laws. Any educator who participated in or facilitated these practices will face review. And this district will undergo mandatory bias training and policy restructuring." Elena burst into tears, pulling Marcus into a hug that lasted a full minute. Miguel wiped his eyes, probably thinking about all those times he'd wondered if they were asking too much of the school system. But the most beautiful moment came when Danny walked over to Marcus and said, "Want to sit together at lunch tomorrow? I heard Mrs. Peterson's really nice." "Yeah," Marcus grinned, stimming happily for the first time I'd seen at school. "And Danny? Thanks for getting in trouble for me. That was really brave." 3 weeks later, I got a call from Amanda Foster with an update that made everything worth it. "Sophia, the state investigation found evidence of systematic discrimination affecting 127 students across the district over 6 years. 12 administrators have been terminated or demoted, including all the Morrison family members." "What about the other kids? The ones from previous years?" 43 students are being offered placement back in appropriate programs with compensatory services. The district is paying for counseling and academic support. And here's the best part, they're establishing an advocate position specifically to prevent this from happening again. The suspension that started this whole mess? Officially expunged from Danny's record, along with a formal apology letter from Superintendent Williams acknowledging that my son had shown exceptional moral courage in protecting a vulnerable peer. Danny keeps that letter in a frame on his desk, next to a photo of him and Marcus at the science fair where they won second place for their project on dinosaur extinction theories. Marcus knows more about paleontology than most adults, and now he has teachers who celebrate that instead of silencing it. Sometimes the best trouble you can get in is standing up for what's right, even when the adults around you have forgotten how. Especially then. My son got suspended for the best reason ever, because he understood that protecting his friend was more important than protecting himself. And in the end, that 8-year-old's courage changed everything.